I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make a chocolate banana cake, and this is what it looks like. This cake is wonderfully moist and it has a really nice chocolate and banana flavor. And then we're going to frost it with a rich and creamy chocolate ganache. So the first thing you need to do is to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a 9 by 13 inch pan, that's 23 by 33 centimeter. And I'm going to butter the inside of my pan. Now you could just spray it with one of those non-stick sprays. And when I butter my pan, I just melt a little bit of butter, and then I'm using a pastry brush and just brush the bottom and the sides of your pan. Make sure you get into the corners. Okay, looks good. And then what I like to do is just take a piece of parchment paper and line the bottom of the pan with that. That way when you're cutting your cake, because I'm not going to take the cake out of the pan. So when you cut your cake, then that way you're not going to scrape the bottom of the pan. There you go. So this is really easy. I'm not using a stand mixer or a hand mixer or anything for this. It's kind of a dump and stir type of cake. So in a large bowl, I have 1 3/4 cups, which is 230 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. And for the chocolate flavor, we're going to use unsweetened cocoa powder. So you will need 3/4 of a cup, which is 75 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder. Now you can use just the natural unsweetened or Dutch process, whichever one you like or have in the house. I am going to strain it or sift it because cocoa powder does tend to have lumps. And this is going to give our cake a really rich and deep chocolate flavor. I really like it. So, put that there. And then you will need 1 1/2 teaspoons, 6 grams of baking powder, 1 1/2 teaspoons, 6 grams of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon, 2 grams of salt. And then the last thing is 1 3/4 cups, which is 350 grams of granulated white sugar. And we're just going to whisk all that together. We want to really make sure that that baking powder and baking soda is really mixed in, because if you don't really mix, especially the baking soda, you can get little pockets of bitterness, which no one wants. So just the other thing you could do is you could sift all this together, but I'm just going to whisk it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now in another bowl, we're going to put all our wet ingredients. I have 2 large eggs here, which is 100 grams if you want to weigh your eggs, and have them at room temperature. And I'm just going to whisk them to break them up. And then we're making a banana cake, so we need bananas. Whoop, almost dropped it. So you will need 1 cup, which is 250 grams of bananas. So I'm just going to put that in there. And you want ripe bananas. So what does a ripe banana look like? This. Typically when you buy bananas, I find in the store, they're bright yellow. I find now you can not buy them like ripe like this. They're typically bright yellow. And at that point you can eat them like out of hand, but just on its own. But for baking, you want to let them sit usually a couple days on the counter, and then they get like this. So this is what you want for baking. And I'll just peel this to show you. See, so it has some brown spots. It's perfectly fine. And this is when they get really sweet. See, there's some brown spots, and that is when they're perfect for baking. And if you had extra, you can even just take your whole banana, put it in a freezer bag, and put it in the freezer, and then you'll have some whenever you want to make a cake. Now, for 1 cup, which is 250 grams by weight of mashed bananas, you will need, if it's like this, I think about 2.5. If you're using the large ones, probably 2, because I found these ones weigh about 100 grams, so I need 2.5. So that's it, you know, a medium size, I would say. I usually buy a few extra because you never know if some of them are like really bruised, then you don't want to use them. So I'm just mashing them. You could just use your fingers. I'm just using a fork. You know, some people say put it in your food processor and process. You can do that, but you know, be very careful, because what you don't want is to like puree them and then they get like liquid, because you don't want them that. You kind of want them, you know, a little chunky. I like a little bit of chunks in the in my cake. So yeah, I don't mind a few, like I said, chunks in there. So now you will need a 1/2 cup, which is 120 milliliters of milk at room temperature. You can use full fat, makes a more rich tasting cake. Or I'm actually using 2% because that's what, or reduced fat, because that's what I have in the house. And then for the fat, we're using liquid oil, a flavorless oil. You will need a 1/2 cup, 120 milliliters. Now you can use like a vegetable, a corn, a canola, safflower, or even like a light olive oil. Good thing about when you use oil instead of butter is if you refrigerate your cake, which I tend to do, it doesn't get hard like a butter cake. The oil will keep it soft. And then for flavoring, I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons, that's 6 grams of pure vanilla extract. And the last thing is 1 cup, 240 milliliters. Now there's 2 things you can use. I'm actually using coffee. You can either use freshly brewed, or you can make instant, have it at room temperature. Or you can just use water. 1 cup, 240 milliliters of just filtered water. When my kids were young, I tended to use water. Now that they're grown, I can use coffee. Kind of like that, the coffee flavor with the chocolate. And the banana, and the vanilla, kind of all goes together to me. But either one. And then we're just going to mix that all together. As you can see, this is not a hard cake. I think the work, to me, is just getting all the ingredients out and measured and all that. But if you have a scale, I find a lot easier. Always got to put in the plug for the scale. So I just put a little well in the center of my dry, and I add my wet. And then we're just going to stir them together. This is going to be a fairly liquid batter, so don't panic. You know, I find when I'm mixing batters like this, if you're doing it by hand, a wide bowl is really good. I find it makes it easier. Okay, so you want to make sure all the flours. Okay, that's it. My type of cake. So now just pour that in there, and we're done. Okay, that looks good. So now, baking. Everyone's oven is a little different. I find for this cake around 35, 40 minutes. You know, like I always say, check it a few minutes before, just in case your oven's running a little hot. Sometimes I do. So what you're looking for, it will rise. You will just start to see the cake pulling away from the sides of the pan, and then a toothpick inserted into the center will come out clean. So 35, 40 minutes. So our chocolate banana cake is done. It's risen, kind of springy to the touch, just starting to pull away from the sides of the pan. If you do have some cracking like I do here, perfectly normal, don't panic. So now just put your pan on a wire rack, and what we're going to do is just let that cool down to room temperature, because we need it cool before we can cover it with the frosting. But we are going to start our chocolate ganache because that has to cool down and firm up. So what you will need in a heat-proof bowl, you will need 8 ounces, which is 225 grams of, a good quality, either semi-sweet, or you could even use a bittersweet chocolate. And by that I mean you want to use a chocolate that you would just pick up and you would just eat it like a chocolate bar. So if I'm using a disc, you can use that, or you could use like a chocolate bar and then just coarsely chop it up. I'm using a chocolate with about a 55% cocoa content, so that's a good like semi-sweet chocolate. So we have that. And really, ganache is just chocolate and cream. That's it. So you will need, although I am adding a little butter, but you will need 3/4 of a cup, which is 180 milliliters of heavy whipping cream. That's cream with a 35 to 40% butterfat content. You want to make sure, at least if you're in the States, that it says heavy whipping cream or heavy cream, because we need cream with a good butterfat content, because we want our ganache to set up. If you use a lighter cream, then it would never set up and it would be more like a glaze, which is not what we want here. And I'm also adding just 1 tablespoon, 14 grams of butter, and I just kind of cut my butter into little pieces so it will melt. That's just going to, give you a nice smoother in texture ganache. So I'm just going to put this over medium-high heat. I'm going to bring this up to a boil. Be very careful when it comes up. It'll start to foam up really quick, so don't walk away when you're doing this. You could also, I'm doing it on the stove, but on a hot plate, but you could do it in the microwave, but again, watch carefully. Okay, we're almost there. You can start to see the bubbles. It's about to start to foam up, so I'm going to get it off the heat. And then just pour the hot cream over top of the chocolate. Yum, yum. And I'm just going to swirl it to get all the chocolate under the hot cream. I'm going to let this sit for a minute or two just so it can start to melt the chocolate. Okay, so let's sit there for a bit. So now I'm going to, I'm using just a little a little wire whisk. You can use a spatula. Just start in the center, go around and around, and then start working your way out. Ganache is very interesting because once all the chocolate is melted, if we let it sit for just, not too long, 5 minutes or so, it'll be fairly liquid. And then what we could do is, at that point, you could pour it over like a layer cake. It's more like a glaze at that point, or a torte, or you really could pour it over this. But what I'm going to do for this time is, if you let it sit and let it cool down, and then the longer you let it sit, it'll actually start to really firm up. And then what we can do is what we're going to do. You can beat it, and it'll get like a soft and fluffy spreadable frosting. And then you really could even refrigerate this, and it'll get really hard. And then you could, or firm, I should say, you could make truffles. So it's a great frosting or glaze, or lots you can do with it. So there we have it. And see, you can see it's very liquid at this point. So I'm just going to let it sit here and let it cool down and firm up. And then we're going to beat it. And then I'm going to let the cake cool down to room temperature. And then when we come back, we will frost our cake. So now our chocolate banana cake has cooled down to room temperature. And this is what my chocolate ganache now looks like. You can see it's pretty thick. If yours wasn't this thick, what you could do is just pop it into the refrigerator to chill it down, and that will firm it up. Just stir it every once in a while. Or the other thing is you could get a larger bowl, put some ice cubes in the bottom, and then just put this in there. Same thing. But this is what you're looking for. So now what we're going to do is just beat it for a little bit. That will lighten the texture of the ganache. I mean, you could just, this is spreadable at this point. You could just spread it on the cake, but I like to make it like a little more fluffy. Now you could just use a wire whisk for this, or I'm going to be a little lazy and I'm going to use my hand mixer for this. Okay, so as you can see, it has lightened in color. Whoop, a little slop there. Well, so there we have it. Now we'll just spread it on our cake. And then you could just use the back of the spoon or an offset spatula to pour it. I'm just going to smooth it out. And then I'm just going to pop this into the refrigerator just to firm up just a little. And now once I spread this out, you could sprinkle some candy sprinkles or some mini chocolate chips if you want. But so I'm just going to let this chill up for maybe 10 minutes, and when we come back, we'll try a piece. So we're now ready to cut our cake. So sharp knife. Now you can cut this as big or as little as you want. What I like to do between cuts is just take a paper towel or a cloth, wipe off, so you get a nice clean cut. Okay, oh, whoop, left part of that in there. That first piece always the hardest to get out. Okay, so there we have it. You know, I really like the contrast of the dark chocolate cake with the whipped ganache. So let's try some. I've been making this cake a long time, and you know what? It's as good today as when I first made it. I really like it. It's got a really deep chocolate flavor, and then you've got the banana flavor to that. I mean, that's really good. And then I like the ganache frosting. Smooth, creamy, rich. You got even more chocolate. And the cake is so moist. It's really nice. Now, when you make this cake the first day, that ganache, you will notice it's a fairly sharp flavor, really nice, rich chocolate flavor. But if you cover it and store it like overnight, a lot of times I put it in the fridge, then the frosting and even the cake, the flavor will soften. So I like it the first day, I like it the second day. Actually, this cake really stores well, probably 4 or 5 days if you store it in the refrigerator. So it's a really nice snacking cake. You know, the kids come home from school, they'll love a piece. So try this one. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.